So it's funny, normally at these things I give what tends to be an hour to an hour and a half confessional come Fight Club meet, come PTSD awareness meeting. But I feel like in the last year I've had so much of my own personal story blogged or films. I'm going to open this up to a Q&A because I really want to answer your questions today, so I want to be sure that I can cater to you as much as explain to you about me. It would be also very easy to use the time that I've got in thank yous. And I don't want it to turn into like an Oscar speech. But I can stand there for 2 weeks just naming people that without whom I wouldn't be here. But there's a set of people, two sets of people that really I have to mention. And one are all of you in the room. Without you, I certainly wouldn't be. I'm sure many of you I know from social media. And if it wasn't from for the help, support, encouragement. So my thanks to you all, and my thanks obviously to Side as well for investing in these photographs and the work that we've done. For sure, there'd be no pictures on the wall if you hadn't invited me, so thank you for that. But there's no one more important to thank than the people in the photographs. Probably one of the first things I ever said about any of my pictures was somebody was giving me lots of praise, which is it's always very nice and very humbling, but I felt the urge to point out that without, it was actually this photograph here, David's. I had to point out to them that without David's, you'd be looking at a photograph of a wall and a single bar fire. And without all of the people in all of these pictures doing something incredibly brave and incredibly selfless, these pictures simply wouldn't exist, and more importantly their testimony wouldn't exist along with them, and you wouldn't have the context that they so graciously and selflessly and passionately and committedly have given to me to then be able to pass on to you. I'm not even sure I view myself as a photographer. I don't really know what I am. I know I'm a carer. For those of you that don't know, I left art school just before I graduated to return home and look after my mother. I did that when I was about 23, and that was my life, and still is my life, and my partner's life now as well. I never planned to be a photographer, but I'd reached a point, maybe a lot of you know this story, so I won't go into it too deeply, but when I discovered I could take pictures, it wasn't a very long process for me to find out that I really wanted to redress the imbalance of how people enduring the benefit system or a disability or poverty were being reported in the press, because they were not being humanised at all. In fact, they were being dehumanised, and in no way more so than in policy. When the current government, I don't know if I can swear in here, but I might, so yeah, there you go. Because normally I swear like a fucking trooper, so it's really difficult to not. When I saw my peers and my community being stereotyped for the problems and the ills and the hardship that some people, some middle class people faced, that made me furious, because in my own personal life, you know, I've been a carer for a severely disabled mother for, I suppose, nearly 25 years now, and she lives on a pittance. Me and my partner, we live on £64 a week. Have done for maybe 5 years. It's not a pity cry. It's a reality, and we're not alone. There's many thousands and thousands of people enduring these times, especially enduring austerity, and it's really hard. And I think a lot of the people, well, certainly all the people in the photographs that I've made are the people in my town that people don't notice. They look at them and they make a very quick judgment. You know, it's easy for some to look at the epidermis of somebody, and I know what that person is. I know their story. And I even saw it a lot in photography. I saw certainly a lot of street photography when I started, which was about 10 years ago. And it struck me that what people were really doing was they were going on safari. They were looking for people, they were hunting people that looked different or strange or odd or disadvantaged. And it was their prize to take a photograph of that person. Their reward was encouragement on social media. You're a great photographer because you made a picture of a homeless guy. But no context, no testimony. And without that, I don't know what these pictures do other than reinforce some of the stereotypes that the media help convey, and certainly the government likes to peddle. Having been through a lot of the hardships in common with my friends on the wall here, I knew that I wouldn't want anyone to make a picture of me at my lowest ebb, and there have been a lot, and at its most extreme, there was a moment where I hadn't spoken out loud for almost a year. I didn't really need to. I knew my duties as a carer. My dad was suffering a nervous breakdown, and my mother really doesn't understand what I say. So I didn't know anyone else. I'd become completely ostracized from all my friends, and I was just this little entity bouncing along in space with no purpose, direction, future, friends, or anything. And some of you might know that I was just given a camera by a friend to borrow, and within a month I'd made my first my first photograph of another human being. I tried the trees and the sheep and the fields, because that's kind of our landscape, very flat, very makes you want to kill yourself. But a couple of doors down there was an old guy that had moved into the front porch of his house after his wife had died 20 years prior. And he lived in the front porch along with about 30 cats. And I would go for walks really late at night to clear my head. And I'd say hello and he'd say hello. And I'd still never really understood why, because I hadn't spoken to anyone for so long. I walked past one day, not at 3 o'clock in the morning this time, and he went like this. And the next thing I knew, I was walking up the drive and I had the camera with me, and I didn't say anything on the first meet. He just brought me in, and I sat down on the floor in front of him, and he started talking, and a tsunami of information was thrust at me, that washed over me, and he gave me his entire life, and I understood that, he'd basically locked himself away from life when his wife had died. And something made me, I remember looking at the camera, and he looked at the camera, and I kind of just gesticulated, is it okay if I make a picture? And he gave, yeah, that's fine. So I did, and I made a few pictures in that very first meeting. And that was my first experience of making a photograph of another human being. And I made him a print, and I gave him the print, and he loved it so much he put it up in the pub before the pub was shut down, and he put it up in the post office before that was closed down. And he loved them. And over the next maybe month and a half, I kept revisiting, and in the space of these 2 months, he told me all about his politics. He was an old socialist, and he told me about when the road in the village was just a dirt track, and he told me why he had 2 white canes on the wings of his car, because he was going blind, and that helped him see where the ends of the car was, so he didn't drive into traffic, which I thought was a bit suspect, but it worked. And he introduced me to his many cats, which there were numerous. But he loved these portraits. They really unlocked something in him, and he poured even more information into me. Unfortunately, this is a important lesson for anyone that's making photography. You don't know, always back up your stuff, because I lost my first 2 years of shooting. So unfortunately, I had a great photograph where I was holding onto his arm, and I'm shooting from here, and as he taught me to waltz. And this is like an 86-year-old, 87, 88-year-old guy, and that was one of my beautiful. Maybe that photograph was meant for me, because I've got it in there. Then I found out he had cancer. And this is all in the space of a 2-month period. I noticed because he had a plaster on his neck, and my dad's always cutting things off. He's cut the same finger off twice using a wood saw. You'd think you would learn, but he doesn't. So I assumed it's just a nick, just a scratch, and I asked him what's the matter. He says, I had to have a biopsy for this. I've got cancer. I've got to go in and have an operation. And I made one final photograph with WH, and it's of two kittens fighting, and him looking out of frame, and you can see the biopsy plaster hanging off his neck. And I didn't know that that would be the last photograph I would make of him, or anyone would make of him. I didn't realise that was going to be the last conversation he'd really have with anyone. Because he was admitted to hospital for an operation, had the operation, that was a success, but contracted an infection in hospital, and a week later he was dead. And I was left with, I was heartbroken. I hadn't spoken to anyone for close to 12 months, not spoken out loud for close to 12 months. And then I'd made this amazing friend, and he made me feel alive again, because I felt like a negative before then. I felt like a transparency. I didn't really exist anymore. But I was left with these photographs and all of this information in my head and in my heart. And essentially what WH did for me was he told me what I was going to do for the rest of my life. He gave me the blueprint, and I understood that what I'd been given by him was this testimony, and it was my duty to preserve it and to share it. So I began actively becoming aware of two things. One, that I was very unhappy with the way the media were presenting people on benefits. This was, I suppose, this correlated with the things like Benefit Street on TV. And you know, I'm all for one side of a story, and obviously, you know, every system has people that abuse it or don't abuse it. I wish they'd do the same thing for white collar people that abuse crime, but they don't. But the problem for me was I saw no counterpart. I didn't see the same programming for unpaid carers or child carers or anything like that. It was all very one-sided, and then it started to transpire in policy. And that really worried me, because if there's no voice countering the scapegoating that's happening to pass policy, you're fucked. There's no one standing up for you. There's no one protecting you. There's no one defending you. And I realised that, unlike a lot of the street photography that I was seeing, actually I'll backtrack a little bit. When I was given this camera, I had no idea how to use it, and it had been left on manual, which confused the hell out of me. It would have been, I'd have been a different photographer if it had been left on also. But the bonus was it was a digital camera, and I'd never really seen a digital camera before. And I realised that you could make a frame and you could see what was wrong with it instantly, which was a big help. So I kind of quite quickly worked out about exposure and all of that sort of stuff. And do you know what, I was looking at that microphone so intently, I've completely lost my train of thought. I was thinking to myself while I was talking, that was just like honeycomb, isn't that beautiful?
So, who has a question? There we go, right. Oh.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello.
Where's the joy in your life now? Because I see your photographs, and I remember Tyneside in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and up to now. There's no change.
No.
It's desperate. It
Absolutely.
hasn't ever not been desperate that I've
No.
witnessed as an adult.
I agree.
And there's got to be joy though, because you're alive and you look good. So
very
can you
much.
just tell us a little bit about that?
I've had the joy in my life. Well, I had to go to Rome and fall in love with my partner to find that. But before that, I was suicidal. And, do you know, you're a bugger, because I was going to save this right to the end. Because there's one person that I absolutely have to thank, and that's Laura. Because, you know, for those of you that know me, you'll know this story, but the last year was particularly difficult personally, because we spent 7 months fighting to get my disabled mother her PIP. Okay, so she's been on disability living allowance for close to 30 years, has a big carrier bag full of drugs every week, and she's got an incurable, incurable, progressive illness that's rendered her bedridden half my adult life. Yet still we had to prove that she wasn't a benefits cheat. And because of, oh Christ, I won't go into the mechanics of the profit and how they run ASOS like double glazing cells, where you get profit for the amount of sits that you do in a day and the speed that you get through it, but it's very dehumanizing, and given my mother's condition, it's terrifying for us. We've basically had, I don't know, half a year, maybe even longer, just her begging us to have her euthanized. Take me to Switzerland, I want to die, I can't handle the stress. And we were turned down for the first time through a clerical error. And it ran on and on and on, and basically what happens is after 6 months, then you get to speak to the person that can make a decision, and it was decided instantly. But we still went through the 7 months of hell, fighting for it, but also the 2 years preceding that, because you start to worry when the policy's announced, and the moment you hear you're going to potentially lose everything, my parents would have effectively become homeless. They would have had to have sold the house to pay for care. I obviously couldn't have stayed on as a carer because we couldn't, me and Laura live in the shed just to be close enough to care for mum and dad. But to answer your question, if it hadn't been for Laura, I probably wouldn't be here at all. And these photographs wouldn't exist. So I think it was John Lennon, wasn't it, that said, behind every idiot is a great woman. So that was the main person I was going to thank today. So thank you, sweetheart. Also, hand developed all of the negatives for those prints because I forgot how to do it, and she's much better at it than I am. So, yeah.
Okay, do we have another question? Come on, somebody must have a question to ask.
Actually, you've got me back to my train of thought. My
All
train
right.
of thought was
Think of question.
thinking of when I thank Laura and I thank all of you and I thank the people in these photographs and everybody on social media. I think because I've had so many people thanking me, kind of congratulating me. This is your day. This is your show. Aren't you proud? Aren't you excited? And I don't want to be a party pooper, but I'm not. It's a collision of emotions for me because obviously I'm very grateful for the opportunity and I'm very humbled by the support. But my aspiration isn't to be a known photographer. In fact, I quite dislike people that's their goal because they seem to not mind treading on people to get where they want to be. I've always been in the service of the people that wanted to share and their stories. And I think probably right after meeting WH, it became really apparent to me that I wanted my photographs not to be an expression of me, of my ego, because to be fair, when I first held a camera, that had all gone anyway. I was pretty much an empty shell. I didn't have a self that I wanted to project. I didn't want to give the world my view or vision of my experience of life. I felt more like a human link in a chain where there's a person to my left who really is desperate to have their voice, because everyone has a voice. There is no voiceless, and some of the most loud and passionate voices are those that suffer the most. It's just they need amplification to be heard. And I didn't see many people amplifying these stories with context. So I've always envisioned and passionately strived to make these photographs an act of community. I'm not here as a photographer today. My name might be on the poster. I suppose it has to be because you've got to call it something. But I'm here as a representative. I'm not here as the man responsible for all of this, because I'm not. I'm responsible for a very small part of what you see. The photography is just the thing I can do. It's my duty to do it, because everyone in these pictures is desperate to have their experience passed on to someone else, so they might not just be perceived as the villain they might be by media. Jump in. Sorry.
I just wanted to ask you, I haven't looked at the photos yet, I've just got here, so I'm assuming that from what you're saying, they are of people who are struggling by themselves near where you live.
Yeah.
Are they all just near where you live, or have
that's
you
a
got
really good
other
question.
projects
No,
that are moved? This is Dereham, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so I live in Yaxham, which is a very small village about 2 miles outside of Dereham.
I grew up in Norwich. So
Oh,
right,
yeah. Okay, it's much changed.
Yeah.
The second book will really nail how it's changed, by the way. Let me think. Sorry, you threw me then. It's so strange to meet someone that's actually come from... Can you rephrase your question again? The
No,
picture...
just,
No, I remember,
yeah, right,
sorry.
okay.
Okay, so I've never made a picture more than 3 miles from home, ever. I don't have a car, don't have any transport. I crashed my motorbike and they got banned from riding them, and I can't afford to ride one now. Anyway, so no transport. Everybody that is within these pictures, they're all people, not that I met with an eye to photograph them, they're all people I've just met in life. My photography is a component of my life. It doesn't dictate my life. So let me think, who can I show you? Okay, so David was a guy that I used to see around town when I was about 11. You'd always see him walking around town. He was walking everywhere, walking and cycling, very active. And then independently of knowing the face of David, I met Eugene, his mum, in the street. And I got really friendly with her because before I was invited into people's homes, I was making street portraits. Because I went from nearly 15 years of being a carer, so having all of my social life stripped away from me, so I was just left with me and my mother and father, and then spending a year not talking and self-harming and drinking too much and self-medicating. A lot of stress, and isolation's a real tough one. That's the one that will break you, I think, the isolation. And I met Eugene in the street while I was waiting for a bus. I meet a lot of people waiting for the bus. And I got really friendly with her, got really close with her, just talking in the street. I just seemed to see her whenever I went into town to do errands for my folks. And then she disappeared. And I got really worried because she was already quite old when I started talking to her. So I asked around, and about 3 months went past, and eventually I met someone that said, "Oh yeah, Eugene, her son's been in an accident and blinded." And I said, "No, this must be someone else. It can't be the same Eugene." And it was. I just never realised that Eugene had a son. She'd never mentioned it, but maybe why should she? But I still didn't know it was David's, and then me and Laura were in town and we saw Eugene, and I think the photograph's up somewhere where Dave's holding on to her coat to be guided. And all of a sudden these two people were thrown together. That Eugene was Dave's mum, and it was Eugene's suggestion, "Do you want to come round and talk to David?" Basically he'd fallen off his bike. He was always a really active guy, and his bag had got caught around the front wheel of his bicycle, had been thrown over and broken his upper jaw, his neck, and they'd thrown him in an ambulance, and he choked on the blood and slipped into a coma, and when he woke up he was blind, completely blind, 100% nil line perception blind. So I meet people and I always make a point of saying that they're not subjects and it's not projects. People aren't subjects. The people in these photographs, they're not my subjects. That gives me an instant patriarchal overlording, it places me above, and they're not. They're my community, they're my friends, they're my peers, and I meet, just like I just met you. Give it another 10 minutes, it would go into the subject that I make pictures, and I'd maybe talk to you about something important in your life, and I might say to you, "Hey, I do this, do you want to share? Do you feel like there's something you want to share with someone else?" I've got to the point now where I get referrals. I've got like a network of people, and they'll know someone who knows someone, and I'm the guy with the camera who does with a recorder, and go and see him, because you're getting nowhere with social services. So maybe if you tell someone. So does that answer your question?
The other part
Yes, sorry.
was, are you expanding this at all? Are you looking?
Well, it's been
to go
difficult the last
elsewhere?
8 months because it's been completely taken up with me going a bit scatty over the stress of dealing with Mum's PIP claim. But yeah, the next book will be, I can tell you what the next book's called if you like. The next book's called Signal to Noise. That will be explained, but it's basically about how difficult it is if you've got something to say, how to get it into the noise that's just everywhere. You throw a photograph out onto the internet, you instantly, it's like throwing a stick in, it's like playing poo sticks in a tsunami. It's very difficult. But then you multiply that by somebody who's got absolutely no outlet at all to get their opinion out there. It becomes very difficult. So it's a lot of it's going to be about capitalism and about how the landscape has changed as much as the physical makeup of the population. But essentially it's going to be very rooted with people and their experience. But I mean, one thing about Dereham you might not know, having grown up there but not been back. When we moved there in '81, even though my dad's local, he moved down to Somerset, moved back. There wasn't one supermarket in Dereham. There's now 8 supermarkets in a 3-mile radius. We never had a McDonald's or a Costa or any of these things. It used to all be like family-owned, family-run, local grocers, pretty much the same everywhere. And now it's all chain stores. And all the fields are being obliterated for housing. So it's the right time, right place, really, because I'll be able to... It's going to be such a radical change for a place. It used to be the thing that if you heard a London accent in town, you'd be shocked. Now I'm shocked if I hear a Norfolk accent, and it's like walking through a high street in Peckham. Change is inevitable, but it's also important to recognise it and document it, because it's people like David and that community who are now kind of being pushed right out. They're almost like strangers in their own home, and they're treated like it. My dad's got quite a broad Norfolk accent. The amount of times he gets like heckled and called a Norfolk idiot, and you know, the Alan Partridge stereotypes. That's what Norfolk is to a lot of people. You know, it's yeah. So that's what I'll be dealing with next. If you want technical questions, go for it.
Yeah. So what has happened to these people that you have so incredibly told us about? Are they getting comfort? Do they have any sense that they've moved an audience, or have they gotten?
Oh, you mean through the work?
Yep.
Yeah, through the work.
Any
It's
services?
probably the only piece of positivity or empowerment that any of them have. Some of them have passed away, unfortunately, and I would argue the point that that's as a direct result of austerity. 100%, no 2 questions about it. So you can add then to the 120,000 others that seem to not get talked about much in the press. Yeah, most everyone is still in the same situation as they were 8 years ago. You know, the whole point of when I put together the book with Colin, thank you Colin for being here. If you want to find out when I first met Colin, go to my website in the About section. You can see when Colin suggested would I like to do a book, which was the greatest comment I've ever had on anything I've ever done, because it wasn't expected, and it was also with a publisher that I had already blossoming respect for, much like Side. So I've kind of climbed my 2 greatest mountains and stuck a flag in the top, which is great. But the big climbing team has helped me get up there. But when I made the book, I essentially took 7-8 years worth of moments, and personally I feel like the book flows like 24 hours. And the thing that's frightening about that is it shows the cyclical Groundhog Day loop that it just never changes. Like, I mean, me and Laura can speak directly about this. Our life's the same every single day. You know, my mum's condition is the same every single day. There's no break, there's no it's kind of like no highs. It's just a constant flat line of hard, stressful, difficult stuff, and we're not alone in that. There's hundreds of thousands of people experiencing that. But in the instance of, you know, everybody, like Simon, for example, who's in the big picture there, is on the cover of the British Journal of Photography, which is great. I got the pleasure of telling him he's a cover star. Imagine that for him. He is so blown away because someone's paying attention to him. You know, I mean, I found, right, if I go all the way back to when I first spoke to WH, the elderly gentleman, so much of, I'm sure so much of that was because I dared to listen, you know, and I don't even think that my photography really is about so much about seeing, it's about listening. And given the climate of the country, where so much of what's happening is because people are shouting at each other, no one really cares to think, well, all right, I disagree with you, but at least I'm going to listen to you to find out essentially why I disagree with you. No one's listening. I felt the same when I'd gone through this year-long process of not speaking. You probably get it now because I'm answering your question very longly. I just go on, and you go through that process where when you don't get to talk to anyone, it's a real release. You know, it's a huge release, and that's what I've found with everyone that I've photographed. I often find myself feeling like I'm a cross between a barman and I was going to say priest, but they've had too sketchy history. We'll say barman, even though I gave up drinking. People quite often don't have anyone to talk to. They can't talk to the partner because the partner's going through the same stuff. They certainly can't talk to the social services or the job centre because they treat them like shit. And no one else really cares to listen. So especially when I meet someone for the very first time, normally it's, I'll meet someone in the street and I'll get talking, or say someone's referred me and I pop over and have a cup of tea and a chat and I'm making pictures within 30 seconds. I'm always so aware that it's a real catharsis, and I've probably been out more times than not even touched my camera. Than I couldn't count how many times I've done that because the conversation's been, just the moment hasn't warranted it. I've never made a picture without somebody wanting it to happen. There's several kind of ways that we'll make pictures within. Essentially, it's a collaboration. First of all, I'm always invited. I'm not preying on people. It's not candid. And the way that some pictures look candid, and that happens when we'll kind of decide when I arrive. Some days it's a day that we have a chat. Some days it's a day where I make a portrait, and some days it's what I say is today I'll be invisible. And all of these pictures were made in the 3 hours a week I get free, which is why it took so long to make the book. And I might only make 10 frames in those 3 hours. Maybe 60% of the time I won't make a picture at all. But in terms of does it give people some pleasure? Yeah, damn right. Because without the outlet, without the opportunity, that frustration of not being, you might as well be dead. That's the feeling. And you literally might as well be dead. And there's certain people that would wish you were. Certainly this government. Mm-hmm. Any more?
Kristen, towards back there.
I'm just wondering, if you had the chance to show these to the awful government and they wanted to talk to you, would you? Because
yeah, you kidding me?
Yeah.
I've read them all.
Yeah, that's just because we were talking before, and I see so much of my own life, my friends' lives, and it's in Newcastle and Sunderland. It is hideous, and
Can only imagine.
I have 2 0 contract jobs. I'm a student, and if I had the chance to, show this to someone, or even share it,
Yes.
You mentioned social media a lot. Is there more that we can do on social media to get the message out and try and get people aware of what's going on? I mean, would you want that even?
No, absolutely. I was going to. I want to say my original thought because that would sound mercenary. Because I was going to say buy the book and send it to your MP. But I'll go you one better than that. If you link them to my website, they can see the book Sorry, Colin. You can see the book digitally for nothing and send it to your MP or send it to. I only said it this last week. That it was easier to be stood here in the gallery of my dreams with icons feet from me than it is to get a political blogger to share testimony from the things that they say they're writing about, which I find fucking unbelievable. You can talk to. I've probably reached out to every activist group or political group on social media, and I've had maybe 3 people respond to me in 5 years, which I find odd. That these are organisations that are there supposedly championing people like me, but they don't want to know.
I bet you've never heard from a Tory.
Only when I got blocked. But no, I mean, I live in Norfolk, which is one of the blue. I don't know where we. My partner's French. We live in one of the highest majority places that voted to leave the EU. It's always has been, probably always will be a very Tory area. We've got our local minister is George Freeman, who has been quoted in the press as saying awful things about mental health. And Norfolk has one of the worst records for mental health. We've had extreme measures maybe 5 times in the last 6 years. If you know the long story about Tilney One and his schizophrenia, if you go from the very first story, when I didn't really know how to make pictures, but I left them up because the context is important, he wasn't doing so bad at the start, but that was before they retired his outreach team, the psychiatric nurse that knew everything about him. He was sectioned 3 times just 1 year ago. He's got no help. It's just medication. If he stops taking his medication, he'll have a manic episode straight back inside. That's not help. People look after pets better. And this is the thing that if you need a fuel to keep doing something for a number of years and not question the sacrifice that you have to make, that's the fuel for me, because that's not just wrong, that's palpably evil to me. There's, you have a pen swish in Whitehall because somebody looks at a graph and they go, well, look, we can save this if we do this. And that's as close as they'll ever get to the experience. And that has to change hugely. So if there's anything that you can do, hit up an MP or anyone, just share the work. Don't share, it's not my work. Don't think you're doing you are doing me a favour, but that's not the causation for doing it. Send them, even better, send them the stories, because then they'll get the full written testimony and context as well. Because for me, the photographs, they're a tool. They all perform a function, and the function is to push at people to stop in this sea of, look what I had for tea tonight and my trainers, and being advertising companies for great corporations. You can stop them long enough with a photograph, maybe they'll read that bit, because it's that bit. That's why those photographs exist. So, yeah.
Ross?
This kind of links to the last question. I gather that you've made clear that you very much wanted the exhibition to happen here. And I mean, the exhibition is up till March, I think Lee said.
Yes.
So what are you hoping will happen as a result? No, as a result of it being here. And also I wanted to ask Lee, sorry to put you on the spot, but whether, what the plans are of anything happening around this exhibition in terms of visits or school, or, I don't know, maybe you can't answer that right now. But I mean, you want to get the information across, this is an opportunity. Yeah?
Absolutely. One thing I absolutely want to happen is, I was talking to your man that runs the Twitter. He was saying that was going, which is great. One thing I want Sides to get acknowledged and further recognised, I hope, for being the best gallery in Britain, for sure. And what makes me say that is a bit like working long form as a photographer. When you work a long time on something, that takes dedication and commitment. And I said it recently in an interview. It really takes love. Love is such a powerful, motivating force, I think. There isn't, I'm sure, another gallery in the whole country that's done as much for work within this kind of context for so long. And so, this was my mecca for a long time, and I dreamed of visiting Side just as a punter, just to pay homage to this place. And the first time I come is pictures that I've helped make on the wall. So what do I hope? I hope it gets people talking, because that's the one thing that people aren't doing very much of these days. More importantly than that, I hope it gets people listening to the people that they're conversing with. If it can make one person go next door and check on a neighbour, that's a win, for sure. Do I expect any politicians to pop down and shed a few phony tears and say they're going to resign their posts because they're in such disgust at policies that have now been in existence for close to 10 years with no challenge and no change? That's highly doubtful. If it can inspire another photographer to pick a camera up and do similar work and work with testimony, that's what I'd really like. That's the one I was talking about, it being like a fight club meet. That's, I think when I first started, within the first 3 months, somebody wrote a blog post saying, in fact it was Duck Rabbit, great blog, and I'm really good friends with them now, said that why Jim Mortram's Small Town Inertia is the greatest British photography project. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? I didn't understand it at all. I still blown away by the compliment, but now I understand it in the context, because the context they were saying it from was we'd already lived through maybe 3 years of austerity, but nobody had been making any work. Nobody had been recording any context. And that's a real worry. Photography is probably more important and more prevalent now than any point since the box brownie, when everybody had a camera and everybody was making pictures. But we're not making the same kind of pictures. Instagram is a very weird narcissistic trip. You know, there's a lot of people making work about themselves, and Ballard, you know, J.G. Ballard would be thrilled to see that everybody is now living in their own film, and Warhol would love it because everybody's famous for 15 nanoseconds now. But for me, if I can inspire somebody that's working class to use their phone to document what their life's about, that would be the biggest positive for me, absolutely. Yeah, because it doesn't have to be an expensive camera at all. No?
Thanks.
We had another question. I'm going to avoid the question. There's no. Yeah.
I've been following your work for a couple of years actually.
Thank you.
And I've been very interested in the way in which this project has developed. And obviously this is the work that we see on the wall is an extension of your relationship with the people who you work with. And that particular relationship is the relationship that enabled you to make the images. But in that time, the work has become more public, you know, in many ways. And I'm wondering whether any of the people who you worked with now kind of have second thoughts about it, or feel...
No, not at all, and I'll tell you why. That was the whole point they wanted to do it. They didn't... this comes to another point actually about... I think a lot of photographers think that their work begins and ends with click. But it doesn't. After click, you're then the guardian and the custodian and the parent. But you know, most of the work that I do is afterwards fulfilling the promise. And the promise was, in relation to the question, do you want to share what you want to share? It's always the first thing that I'll ask someone. Do you feel like no one's listening to you? Do you want people to know? That's the whole reason these pictures are made. If anything, there's a frustration that it's taken this fucking long for people to take notice of, not the photographs, but what they're saying. The testimony. I mean, Eugene died, what, four years ago? So, you know, austerity's still happening. Their lives are still exactly the same. So, no, it's a moment of joy in a jungle of terror when something like this happens. Or like Sy got on the cover of the British Journal of Photography because I asked him to put him there. Because he deserves it. Who listens to him?
I wasn't so angry with that.
No, not at all. Don't think I was angry at you. What I'm angry at is that there's kind of like... I'll tell you what I'm angry with. I'm angry that most interviews that I get to do are about me. They're from photography magazines asking me, the photographer, and I don't give a fuck about being a photographer. That's not why I do it. I want the broadsheets to be, can I publish that story with the context? That would be the only result I'd be looking for. These pictures exist to amplify this truth. Right? There's a lot of talk in photography now about, does truth even exist? Well, I don't view myself as a filter, and I don't view myself as a, let me think. I only view myself as a conduit, or at best, an amplifier. So I take the signal that comes into me, and I try and use whatever skills I have to amplify that noise, that scream, if you like. Because I can guarantee you, everyone in these photographs, including me, at some point has screamed on just a deaf world. So I think maybe it comes from this place of, this isn't a photographer's work. This is a community's collaboration.
I appreciate that. So I was thinking that
Thanks.
some of these images were taken obviously a little while ago, and in that time people's lives move on, and their world kind of changes, and sometimes people might have felt, well, I'm not sure now.
Unfortunately, for everyone, including myself, nothing's changed.
Right.
Yeah, I was just going. I think that's the crux. The crux of the work is that for these people, their lives remain the same.
Yeah.
I think Jim referred to it earlier. That sort of Groundhog Day moment, which people have to
And it is that.
continue to.
So the causation, the thing that would have caused me to make the work, or have the desire to make the work, and for everyone to participate, it's still exactly the same as it was 8 years ago, because nothing's changed. In fact, we're right on the cliff edge of everything getting so much worse, because if things really do fuck up in the next 8 months, it will be us that pay for it. It will be us that really, and it's been hard, and that's one of the things that's made me really quite angry. A lot of passion, a lot of anger about Brexit. I haven't seen a tenth of it for austerity, and it seems to be, it's been okay for the disabled, our most vulnerable, our weakest, our most vulnerable. You can get shit for close to a decade, and we won't march the streets. But if it's going to affect me, you mean I might not be able to have my second holiday home, or whatever the argument is. All of a sudden it's an issue, and everyone starts going psycho about it. Well, where we, I don't want to get divisive because I get it. I'm really I'm really bound to this whole Brexit thing. My partner's French, and they'll have to bring a tank to get her out of the country, won't they, darling? So and my mother's medicine. If she can't get epilepsy medicine, for example, she'll be dead in 2 weeks. So if there's if this ferry ain't working, but to bring it back to austerity, no one really seems to have given a damn. Some people, yeah, absolutely, they get it. But it's normally people that are either living it, or they directly know someone that's living it. Other people are like, well, I don't really want to know about that. So.
Yeah, you've spoken about the people you've photographed with huge affection. And it seems to me that what you've done is that you have documented their poverty caused by austerity. I'm wondering whether you feel you've also managed to document their riches, because my hunch is that they are all people of great riches as well as great poverty.
Right. Yeah, well, I would say one of their riches, absolute riches, is, in fact, I would say this before photographing the poverty, because the poverty is circumstantial. The thing that I've really been photographing is their endurance, and it's that's their strength. I've lived in poverty most of my life, well, so has everyone on the walls, but that's circumstantial. That's not of the self. That's something that's placed on the self in a lot of these instances. But the fact that they've withstood it and they're still here, that's only testament to their great strength and resilience, and it's that endurance that there was a lot of great work made before, I would say, 2000, that it was in the humanist tradition. It didn't make people look bad, there wasn't that kind of nastiness behind it, if I can get that right. But I felt it sometimes in some contemporary work where there's a massive dislocation, and I think a lot of it is when somebody from a fairly okay life just parachutes in for 15 minutes, click, and that's it. That's speed dating versus a romance, a love affair, and I'm betrothed to everyone I photograph. In fact, everybody. The only thing that stops me photographing someone is when they pass away. I keep in contact with everyone I photograph, not because I photograph them, because they're part of my community. So it was always very important to me. I owe you one big time, by the way. It was always very important to me, having been through a lot of the similar struggles. Like, there's a photograph of Kirsty who self-harms. My left arm's covered in 15-year-old scars from self-harming. Helena, was raped twice, and my mother was kidnapped and raped when she was 12. And Shawnee used to drink too much. I used to drink too much. Simon smoked too much pot. I've been there. I paid the price of admission and had my education in photography through having a life. I didn't parachute or drop into someone's life and think I had a kind of like a God-given right to be there to appropriate this information and then sail away and disappear forever. I met everyone as a stranger, but we became friends, and I think that's the whole point of life. You give me enough time with you lot, and I'll do the same thing. I don't know. It's a bit like the chicken and the egg. What came first, the photography or the relationship? But I think certainly in these relationships, it's all about the relationship, and the photography is such a part of me. People wouldn't necessarily question me because I was wearing my glasses. That's who I am, and everybody now knows me as I'm the dude with the camera or the recorder who wants to listen, or it's right. We'll go to the boss to find out if I'm right.
Right.
Oh yeah, there's one more thing.
Yep.
Now I need to ask you all a favour, if it's possible, because there's nobody in these pictures that was able to attend today. And probably the most important one is going to be David, because he can't see, and I wanted to take a photograph of you all to take back to show everyone, because you're talking about a couple of questions. What does it mean to these people? If you could all be so kind and gracious as to give me a round of applause, not, I hasten to add, for me, I would be very embarrassed, but I want to take it back to show everyone what their selflessness has meant to you. So, hang on. You'd think being a photographer I'd know how to work this bloody thing.
Tell us when you're ready.
Yep, okay. So if I count down from 3, 3, 2, 1. That's awesome. Bloody hell. A bit like being
It's material, so it's kind of like nice.